Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris with Sharaad, Kuttan, and on the show, Professor Philip Alston, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. Sharaad, you had a question for Philip about what he knew about Malaysia before coming here.
Yeah, you know, we've been talking in this country about the cost of living. It's a hot political potato, and all sides of the political divide are trying to address it in some ways. It's not that Malaysian policymakers or politicians are unaware of the pressures, the economic pressures on the lives of most ordinary Malaysians. What did you know? Did you know that you know, coming in, there's been this discussion? What were your general impressions of Malaysia before you landed, and did, you know, your kind of conversations with people over 11 days?
I have to admit at a personal level that I was first here almost 50 years ago. One of my daughters got married in Langkawi a few years back. I've been to Malaysia quite a few times. So I've long had a sense of the place. I realized how really poor it was in 1971 when I was here. And of course I'm struck when I come back by how dramatically improved the situation is. It's a transformed country, no question. For these sorts of missions, what I do, I've got a staff working with me, team. They do endless interviews of experts within the country primarily, but not only. We did 70, 80 interviews, all of which lasted for an hour or so. We read all of the available reports. We spoke with a lot of the civil society groups here and others. So by the time I arrived in KL, almost 2 weeks ago, I had a briefing book about that thick, which is all specifically directed at our issues that we're looking at. So I was very well informed, I think it's fair to say.
Did you find that data was readily available to you? I mean, statistical data specifically on issues like poverty can be deemed quite sensitive material. Was it made available to you readily?
One of the peculiarities of Malaysia is the extent to which there is a lack of transparency with statistics, and particularly things that are considered sensitive. So poverty data, particularly some sort of breakdown, how do the Bumiputras break down between the Malays and the indigenous, etc. How do the other ethnic groups come out? What's the difference male and female? Unfortunately, we don't have that information available.
So what they said to you, was that the refrain?
Yeah. And then there was a number of conversations with officials at the state level where I would say, do you have this information? And they'd say, we'll have to get back to Putrajaya for that, the Department of Statistics. Not sure if they'll give it to us or not. Then World Bank, how do you go with statistics? Do you get everything you want? Nope. Unfortunately, they won't give us full access to the microdata and so on. So even when they're trying to do the analyses, they don't get it. And that's a real problem because poverty policy requires pretty careful targeting. You've got to know who your groups are, you've got to know who's doing badly, who's doing well, and the statistics that are available are not adequate.
Right. So when you talk about sensitive issues in Malaysia, race is obviously one of them, and you mentioned the Bumiputra, non-Bumiputra, and also divisions within that. Regional differences, of course, are also often used, especially now, in mobilizing kind of states' rights politics in Sabah and Sarawak. For instance, Sabah, resource-rich territory, feeling, in fact, that they've been left behind, that somehow their resources have been taken by the peninsula and so on. Was that something that you were able to get yourself, get a better picture of what's happening in these territories and how, you know, to what extent poverty is deep-rooted in those territories?
Being an Australian, I well understand federal-state politics and the allocation of the national pie and who's contributing and all that sort of stuff. I think that's very important. I certainly saw on my visits to both Sabah and Sarawak the challenges that they were facing, the very different situation that they're in a lot of respects. They do face very particular challenges, obviously given the size of the two states, given the huge border, its porousness and all of the other things, given the strong indigenous population in both states. I think things are actually very different, yeah.
Okay. Because it is important to get a sense of who is poor, right?
Yeah.
Understanding who is poor will help government and policymakers create social safety nets that will help them. Now, according to your report, you said Malaysia has about 110 social protection programs across 20 different ministries, but all these social protections seem to have no virtual poverty reduction impact. So I'm just wondering, through what you've seen, is there a way to, I guess, what is the best way to be helping the people that you have seen as and identified as poor?
Well, my logic is pretty straightforward. My logic is that if you pretend there's no poverty, you can't be focusing on it, you can't be attending to it. I don't know whether it's appropriate to use the analogy with drug abuse, but I suspect it is. Until you acknowledge that you've got a drug program, I can't help you. I can't tell you what the treatment is. And if you say we've got no poverty, then there's no program. And so again, what I found here, I asked lots of policymakers, what are you doing in this area? And they would describe programs that would be fine for the B40. But if I say, well, what about the B10 or the B15? They'd say, well, sorry, what's that? And I'd say, look, it's a very different group. You know, the needs of those who really are poor are different from the rest of the B40. And unless you're targeting it, oh no, but we don't have poverty. And so there isn't a sort of cross-government set of policies designed to say, what can we do? What are the key groups that we've got to target? How can we get to the poor Bumiputras, for example, who are the most numerous, the most significant, who have not benefited in the way that one would have thought from the NEP and other initiatives? How can we get to the indigenous people? How can we get to those who are stateless and so on? You've got to have that analysis in place before you can do it. So what happened was that each department, education, health, human resources, etc., all have their own programs, and in those they'll each have some sort of what we call social protection element, but they weren't being coordinated. And so again, I had lots of discussions saying, well, you're doing X. What about the health dimension of the people you're helping? I'm not health, that's him.
And you have a few recommendations, right? We're going to get right into those recommendations after this. Stay tuned to consider this.